What's good, everybody? It's your boy Big Nate. Welcome back to Big Nate's Book Reactions, home of the best book reactions. And today we have a dope-ass topic to discuss. Today we're going to be talking about whether it is better to read nonfiction versus fiction. So basically, I found this little clip on YouTube of, I think it's from the Today Show. I don't know. It's from like some news program. And basically, she's interviewing they're doing like a segment on why men read more nonfiction as opposed to fiction. So they basically just interview the men and they talk about why they read. But I figure we can make this like a larger discussion and just about, the pros and cons of reading nonfiction versus fiction. So I got my cup of joe right here. Tink, cheers, sipping in style. And then without further ado, let's get into the clip.
Like so many men, when Jordan Thomas, Justin Diamond, and Armand Ramnath pick up a book, it's usually nonfiction.
I mean, one of the things that I think is so cool about reading is that every person does it for a different reason.
The reason why I read now is because I feel like it's a mental workout for me. It's a way for me to build that intelligence so that when I go into my meetings and when I'm doing things from a business standpoint, I'm sharp. I'm ready to go.
So Jordan here is basically saying that he likes to read nonfiction because essentially that it's like productive. It helps. It's a thing to do with his time that actually elevates him. I mean, honestly, he said that so he could be more intelligent and be sharper for his meetings. I cannot imagine a worse reason for reading than to be better at meetings. I disdain meetings. So can't relate to him on that one, but he does kind of represent this person, and I'm talking about a general sort of character here that I've encountered a lot in my life, where it's like the kind of like the hyper intellectual bro, where they actually kind of like look down on fiction as sort of like a waste of time, and they essentially view reading as like a means to an end, right? They're reading so as to gain information and to learn facts and to use their time productively, which is honestly, it's kind of valid. Like, I think this is one of the benefits of nonfiction is you get to, there's popular science, popular history, psychology. You're able to learn so much new things through reading. And then honestly, if you ask me though, come to think of it, like I said, some of my favorite books are nonfiction, and the ones that I think the truly best nonfiction books are actually the ones written in literary style, using the elements of fiction, at least in some respect. They use metaphor and they draw these images and they give you like a hit. The best nonfiction book ultimately do, tell a story. But so, I'm all, especially, if you're doing that over, obviously that's going to be better than, just like watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians or something. But I think the problem is when the person exclusively reads nonfiction and even looks down on fiction as being having no value or a waste of time because you're not gaining new information. And that's the thing that it seems like to me, these, like I said, the hyper intellectual bros, they basically, how I think about it is they're interested in facts, not truths, and they're interested in intelligence, not wisdom. And I'm actually reminded of this part in Anna Karenina because I'm kind of going through my notes, and there's this, again, hyper intellectual person, cultured worldly man, Sviazhsky, and one of the characters is talking to him, and he's basically saying though he had many conversations with Sviazhsky, and though Sviazhsky had said many intelligent things, not one of those things interested the character Levin. So it's you could have someone who's extremely, I won't even say smart, extremely intelligent, but at the same time doesn't know the first thing about basically life. And that kind of, okay, that's a little dramatic there. But this type of person is somebody who just finds all their value in how much they know, in terms of, external, almost you could say superficial knowledge versus, the knowledge of, again, human life and human themes. So what she does in the next clip here is she hits up the famous author Amor Towles, I believe his name is. He wrote Gentleman of Moscow, which I've been recommended a few times. And she basically asks him why he thinks it's important to read fiction. So let's go ahead and see what he has to say.
I wanted to encourage the gentleman to try out more fiction.
Hi, Amor.
But first, I thought I'd bring in a professional to get his take on why fiction is worth our time. So I called New York Times bestselling author Amor Towles.
Why do you think it's important that we read fiction?
When we read a well-written novel, we become so bound up in the life of the main character or the main characters that you see this when someone's reading in your room. If something funny happens in the book, they laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Or you can turn and they're crying while they're reading because they're so wrapped up in the emotional setback of the character. And when the character has a victory, they're like, yes!
Exactly.
That's a very powerful means in which we build empathy. We start to see the world differently. And a lot of men will say to me, I like to read nonfiction because I learn something.
Yeah.
And the best of literary fiction, you will learn things too.
All right, yeah, so that's Amor's thoughts on, why it's important to read fiction. And there's a few points to talk about there, but one of the first ones he mentioned was essentially this idea of empathy. You're reading the book and you're laughing out loud with the characters, you're crying with the characters, whatever. And it is so true. That is, I think, one of the best benefits of fiction. You are able to just completely dive and immerse yourself into the life of another individual. And through that, you're able to gain new perspectives, right? When you're learning about all the lives, right? When you think about all these books here, all these characters, these are lives, all of which have, stories to tell, in which when you go through, you come out ultimately enriched. And there's certain novels, I think, that also just help put into perspective certain things, even that you do learn about in a factual sense. Like, so for instance, Beloved by Toni Morrison, that's one of those books that for me was really gave life to the life of, to be a slave, essentially. Like, you learn about slavery and you learn in history class, and they talk about the conditions. But when you get into an actual novel, into this actual individual's life as they're experiencing these things, it's an entirely new perspective. Slavery and the idea of slavery just takes on a whole new meaning that it could not have had before until you really lived this embodied life. Or for instance, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl is another one that comes up. I guess that's actually technically nonfiction because it's a memoir, but I'm going to count that. It's story. It's pure story. It's not trying to give you facts or anything, and that in the spirit of nonfiction. But it's one thing to learn about the Holocaust and hear about those horrible conditions, but when you hear Viktor Frankl's story of actually living through concentration camps in the Holocaust, it just gives you an entirely new perspective. And especially when you read these intergenerational novels like 100 Years of Solitude and East of Eden and Pachinko, these are the ones that just come to mind for me. But those are so fulfilling because you're literally watching generation after generation. You're not only are you living, you're living generations of lives in some respect, and the whole, world background is changing and everything like that. You get so many different new perspectives. And also for a book like A Little Life, because my girlfriend's she finished A Little Life. And so we've kind of been talking about it, and it's bringing up my old memories of having read that. But one thing my girl mentioned was when she's reading that book, she's just so invested that when something bad happens, it literally sets her mood off for the whole rest of the day, right? She has this nagging sense that something actually bad has happened in her life, right? It's not just this piece of fiction she puts down. It's something that, it sticks with you all day. And I think we've all had that experience, especially if you read the ending of a particularly tragic book or, anything like that. It is something that literally sticks with you, affects your mood, right? And that's just a testament to the fact that you really are stepping into the shoes of another life and another perspective from which you can learn. And that's also what Amor talks about, right? You can learn things from fiction, just, some of the best things in fiction as you can in nonfiction. To me, it's kind of the difference between, facts and truths, like I already mentioned, intelligence and wisdom. When Homer writes in the Iliad, the generations of leaves, the lives of mortal men, right? That is a profound analogy about life and death, and that what humanity is all of us are but this cohort of leaves which are born, live their lives, but by the end of the season fall and die, right? That is the cycle of life. That is the story of humanity. Humanity is not you can't put it better. The generations of leaves, the lives of mortal men. So too in the Upanishads, they have an analogous line. I forget what it is, but corn rises and falls, so too do more. Whatever, I can't remember. But the point is, these are things that are found in all cultures, and these are deep truths about the human experience, which is why you see them pop up in so many different places. But that's not a fact. It's not the generations leaves the lives of mortal men. That's not a fact. That's not something you learn that has semantic information. It's just a deep truth about life. And when Tolstoy in Anna Karenina writes, I think if there are as many minds as there are heads, then there are as many love as there are hearts. Again, that's just a deep truth about the nature of love across all of humanity, right? We all have our own individual lives and our own individual experiences and relationships with love, right? There are as many loves as there are hearts. So it's just that's not a fact. It's just a beautiful truth about life. And then another example, which has always stuck with me since I read it, was from East of Eden by John Steinbeck, where he's talking about the process essentially of just growing up and realizing your parents are real people, right? They're not these divine, faultless beings, but they're actually, you know, they're real people with their own flaws. Their judgments always aren't right. Their thinking isn't always true. They aren't always just people, right? And he talks about this as like, it's basically almost like the fall of the gods, but basically your parents kind of end up falling, and he calls it this green muck slime, and you can pull it out, and it's, you know, it's very tedious work to clean it all off. And at the same time, no matter how clean you get, it never quite shines the same again, and the child's world is never quite whole again. And that's because you know, that is a coming of age moment that all of us have experienced, where you realize, again, your parents are not these infallible, or just adults in general are not infallible people who know all things, but they are, you know, they're flawed and real humans as well. So, and again, none of these are facts or anything. It's just these, like I said, these are just deep truths about what it is to be human and human existence. And I think that's one, you know, from the best literature you read, that's the type of stuff that, you know, that you have to gain from it. But even honestly, aside from all of this, like in a way, I'm no different than Jordan, because he's saying it's a means to an end, right? I'm almost trying to justify reading it. It gives you empathy, it lets you see new perspectives, you learn new things, truths about human nature, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I just find reading to be intrinsically enjoyable in itself, right? Like in the same way that Jordan reads so that he can become, right, more intelligent, sharper at his meanings, I read purely for the sake, I read fiction for the sake of itself, right? It's not a means to an end. It is the thing in itself that I just enjoy to do. And at the end of the day, I think that's what matters. Ain't that right? Cheers to that. Cheers to that. So, you know, I think this is interesting. The whole segment she's talking about too is this idea that men are more likely to read nonfiction. So I'm kind of curious what people think to have to think about that. I actually do. That seems true to me. Like I do think, and I think that also stems from the fact that it's the symptom of, like, you know, the hyper intellectual bro. Oh, I don't read fiction. That's a waste of time. But I read nonfiction. Whereas I think women just generally, you know, are known to have more empathy. So maybe therefore they gravitate more towards fiction. Of course, these are not like set rules or anything, but that's kind of like my initial, you know, thoughts on that. But I'd love to know why you read only nonfiction, why you only read fiction, or what you think you have, what either of them have to offer. Maybe why you think, is this like a men's specific thing? It does kind of strike me as that. And you know, yeah, just let me know any thoughts you have. So thank you for watching Big Nate's Book Reactions, which is in fact home of the best book reactions.